Thank you for joining us for the fourth in our mini skills sessions series. This is GP Disaster Recovery, Backups and Maintenance Routines, recorded on March 25th and presented by Louis Horner.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody again for joining in. We're going to talk about specifically today SQL Server and how it relates to GP, and I guess more specifically how to maintain our SQL Server databases, back them up, and restore just for disaster recovery. So here's more specifics on what we're going to talk about today. We'll start out with an overview of SQL Server. We'll look at some recommended SQL maintenance. And those maintenance routines are recommended by Microsoft for folks running GP. We'll go through some details on that. We'll look at some actual backups and how to restore SQL Server databases. And then I want to spend a couple of minutes on compatibility, SQL Server versioning compared to GP versioning, because I know a few of our customers have gotten into a little bit of trouble with that here recently. So I want to just talk for a couple minutes about that. And then in light of the current nationwide situation, remote server access, working from home, is a pretty popular concept. So we're going to hope to leave a few minutes for that at the end and give you a little bit of information on what we've seen done in the past and some interesting concepts that we've put in place for our customers. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about SQL Server. SQL Server and first thing, let me make a comment that I'm realizing we're talking to a pretty diverse crowd here before. Some of you are very familiar with SQL Server Management Studio. This may be a pretty basic review for some of you. For others, this may be a brand new concept. So we're gonna try to go pretty basic, but just by its nature, this whole presentation will be a little bit technical because we're going to get into SQL Server Management Studio and look at running some maintenance routines there as well. So SQL Server is a feature-rich database management system. It's self-maintaining. We'll see that we can automate a lot of these tasks that are recommended by Microsoft. And over the years, maintenance and over the version progression, maintenance has gotten a lot easier. We can automate these tasks. They happen in the background. You don't have to run them manually like we did in the old days or schedule them using complex scheduled tasks. In older versions, and I'm talking way back 15 or 20 years ago, a lot of our customers would have needed a DBA on staff to help maintain SQL Server. And a lot of our customers do have DBAs, but not so much from a maintenance standpoint. You'll see these maintenance routines have gotten pretty automated. SQL Server is secure. Your GP data is safe. Passwords are encrypted. Security in SQL Server can be as open or as granular as we need it to be. Now, SQL Server in general, it's an application installed generally on a server. Sometimes that server is locally hosted. You can acquire SQL Server as a service, like Azure SQL. Basically, subscribe to it as a cloud version of SQL Server. And a lot of our customers actually have a hybrid combination running a locally owned license of SQL Server on an Azure server or Amazon Web Services server. So there are a lot of different situations out there. And if anybody's looking to deploy SQL Server, we can help with that as well. By design, SQL Server servers themselves, physical machines, should be separated from other functions. So for instance, you probably don't want to run your SQL Server as a remote access server. You want to keep the user count on that server to a minimum, just from a security standpoint. And you don't want to run, SQL Server, run it as a domain controller as well, more so because of the extra workload that might be needed. But keeping our SQL Server separate from other servers, it just adds an extra layer of security. And it's part of whatever security plan your IT team probably has in place already. So let's take a look at some of these maintenance tasks that's recommended by GP. And we're going to actually get into some details at this point and talk about how to automate some of these tasks. And we'll go through some details on a few of these tasks as well. So what I've got, I am logged into an instance of SQL Server here. So this is SQL Server Management Studio, which is the user interface to SQL Server. This is where the magic happens. Pretty much everything SQL related happens here. So at its core, SQL Server is a database engine, database management system. But as it relates to GP, it's also a platform for heavy-duty processing. Now, most of you might be familiar with the concept of stored procedures inside of SQL Server. In a GP scenario, those procedures are written specifically for GP, so processing happens on a SQL Server as well. And we'll see, if we look at some other components of SQL Server, our database engine is obviously where these databases are stored. Analysis services. If anybody's using Business Analyzer or Excel cubes for GP, that's all built on top of analysis services. Reporting. If anybody uses some of the built-in GP, SSRS, or SQL Server reporting services reports, those are all built on reporting services here. And in addition, we've got integration services for imports and exports. I guess the big thing to keep in mind here is that this is the backbone of GP. So let's take a look at again, some of these tasks. Let me flash this slide back up real quick. Some of these tasks that we want to cover. Some of these are meant to keep your data safe and secure and I guess free of corruption. Some of these things will help point out any issues before they become really burdensome issues. But most of these tasks we'll see are really concerned with tuning your database and throughput and ways to make things run faster inside of GP. So we're going to talk about these things specifically, some backups and restoring. Now, what we're not going to talk about today, keep in mind, SQL Server has a lot of disaster recovery-based components to it. We're not going to talk about things that are related to data redundancy. So in SQL, we have concepts of mirroring and clustering and data replication. We'll leave that for a later topic, or anybody can feel free to ping your AIM consultant if you want more information on those kind of things. So we're going to talk about just specific tasks inside of SQL Server that we'll be processing. So we're going to cover some basic maintenance. Some of these tasks you see spelled out on the screen in front of you. Like I mentioned, they help keep things humming along. Some of them are preventative, try to keep your data safe and secure. So let's take a look at a few of these things. I am going to get back into SQL Server here and actually start creating a maintenance task. Now, I mentioned maintaining these things are easy. We'll see too that even creating these tasks are pretty simple. Inside of our maintenance plans, if we right-click, there's this concept of a maintenance plan wizard. We could use that to create maintenance plans for some of these recommended maintenance routines that Microsoft puts out. So I'm going to go through the SQL Server wizard. I'm going to get what I think is a reasonable maintenance plan set up according to those 4 or 5 different tasks that we saw earlier. I'm going to call this my demo maintenance plan. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through each concept, each option in this maintenance plan wizard. I'm just going to point out the things that are important. So one of the things that are important here, if you do want to schedule this task, is to add some type of schedule to it. Now, for those first few sets of maintenance utilities that Microsoft recommends, this should be done weekly. And I'm going to set this task accordingly. So this task is going to be set to run weekly. Or actually, this group of tasks is going to be set to run weekly. I'm going to run on Sunday, probably 1 a.m. Hopefully, there won't be too many people working at that point, because these tasks can take a little bit to run. They use some resources when they're running. So I don't want to schedule these to run during the day. And there's really no need to schedule them more than once a week. In fact, there's some opinions out there that once a week might be overkill, even for these routines. So we've got our maintenance plan defined. We have a schedule set. Now at this point, we pick which task we want to run. So one of the tasks that Microsoft recommends is checking our database integrity. So I'm going to select that one. We're going to reorganize and rebuild our indexes. Actually, let me back up a little bit. Checking database integrity. You'll see a description on each task as we selected, but the integrity check looks at the structural integrity and space allocation on our tables and databases, and tries to uncover problems before they become real problems. The rest of these tasks are the ones that I mentioned that are just helping to streamline speed. So rebuilding, reorganizing indexes, It'll reduce page splits. It'll help performance. Updating statistics is another one that's recommended. It's used to help identify key values, used to optimize queries and searches inside of GP. Now, the last one that Microsoft recommends, recompiling stored procedures. You notice there's no selection for that on here. So I did a little bit of prep work ahead of time. I put together some SQL code that we're going to execute by way of a SQL Server agent job. So that's the reason I'm selecting that one as well. So we're going to go through the tasks here. And actually, I guess before we run through these tasks, I can take a quick second and show you that SQL Server agent job that I put together to recompile our stored procedures. I know this might be a little more technical than most people need, but here's the actual code that task is going to run. So if anybody needs that code, let me know, or contact your AIM consultant. We can get this over to you, and obviously we can help you get these set up as well. So let me go back to my wizard. We'll go through the motions here of scheduling these tasks to run. First thing it wants you to do is pick out an order that these tasks should run in. Some people may have different opinions on this. I think that the order that we see these in here now should be fine. You know, there might be a real reason to check database integrity before we run these tuning procedures. So I generally leave that one first. I think the others, the order of those don't really matter as much. So here's where we get into the details on defining each specific task. So on our integrity check, we pick which databases we want to run this against. Now, normally you'd run this against all of your GP-related databases. I'm just going to pick what is our demo company inside of SQL Server. And most of these options here, I'm going to accept defaults. Any ones that I change, I'll let you know why I change it and what we should change it to. So next task, reorganizing indexes. Again, I'm just going to pick our demo company database. But again, obviously, you want to pick all of your GP-related databases. And then rebuilding indexes, same thing. And updating statistics. Again, just our one demo database. Okay, and here's where we pick that SQL Server agent job that I mentioned earlier, this SP recompile. We see it here in our list. We're going to schedule that to be run. Now, the last step on most maintenance plans is a means to save error logs, or really success logs as well, not necessarily error logs. But also keep in mind, when these tasks are run, when they're run on a scheduled basis, especially if they're run at 1 a.m. on a Sunday morning, folks will probably not be logged in to watch any errors that might pop up. You can go back and review these logs manually. Log into SQL Server Management Studio, review the logs, or notice there's also an option to email the report as well. That's built on database mail. I'm not going to turn that on, kind of out of the scope of what we're going to talk about here. So I'm going to click next, and one of our last steps here will be the actual creation of this maintenance plan. So here it is. I'm going to close it out. This is our maintenance plan. If we double click on it, we can see the steps, we can see the schedule. It's here, it should be functioning. If we right click on it, we can view history, which is our log that we had talked about. But this one should be good to go. This one is set to run on Sunday at 1 a.m., every Sunday at 1 a.m. Now, I'm not going to kick this one off now because these procedures, even on only one database, will take some time. I'm guessing this is going to take anywhere between 10 or 15 minutes to run just on a single database. So we're not going to run it now. We're just going to close it up. We will obviously log in on Sunday or Monday and check it out, make sure it ran okay. So that's the maintenance plan recommended by Microsoft. Again, to keep your data in tune, keep it safe, help keep it safe from corruption. But we really want to, in a couple of next steps, we'll talk about backing up and restoring. Oh, the first thing I wanted to talk about too, before we get to that, is that this maintenance plan is set to run. It's set to run automatically, and it's scheduled. We also have the ability, though, to run a lot of these tasks inside of GP. So if you're a GP user, if you go to maintenance and SQL, we'll see some of these same tasks here as well that we can run manually on each one of our GP-related databases. But keep in mind, this is a one-off situation. We can run it once. Here, there's no means to schedule it. And also notice there are no means to process all of the tasks that we had talked about. So it's a good fallback if you don't have access to SQL Server Management Studio, but obviously Management Studio is a better place to create those tasks and schedule them. Let me jump back over to our slides for a minute, make sure I don't get too out of line here. Okay, backups, SQL Server backups. So this is critical. This is where we want to be real careful, make sure our databases are being backed up. We want to, well, let's talk about backup concepts in general. Most application-based or cloud-based backup systems have an agent that can back up all of our open SQL Server databases. And I suggest that we do that. Because those backups are generally taken automatically. They're stored in the cloud. It's meant as part of any disaster recovery plan that you have out there. What we want to talk about, though, is the ability to create individual backups that are stored locally on the server here. And I do suggest that those backups, those database dumps that are created on this local server here, also be included in whatever cloud-based or device-based backup systems that you might have in place. So, we want to make sure that we keep our data safe for a lot of reasons. I mean, intrusions and malware are getting more common these days. Hardware failures not out of the question. Data corruption we deal with periodically. And then you've got the oops factor. You do something that you want to undo real quick. Sometimes the only way to undo it is to restore from a backup. So what we're going to do is put together some backup routines that let us not only restore database backups, but I want to point out some features that not everybody might be familiar with, and it's concept of transaction log backups. So database backups, it's just that. It's something that we generally run once a day, usually in the evening, and we'll back up any GP-related databases. I'm going to show you how to do that. We're also going to show you how to do a transaction log backup as well. The transaction log backup, let me back up a little bit. First off, transaction logs are it's kind of a sequential order of how things are written to SQL Server databases. If we back up our databases and our transaction logs, we have the ability to do that point-in-time restore. So if you made a mistake inside of GP at 11:19 a.m. Central Time, we could actually restore that database back to 11:18 a.m. And basically undo what was done already. So with that said, let's create a new maintenance plan to do our database backups. I'm going to use a wizard again, because again, the wizard's pretty friendly. Most of us can figure it out. So this time, we're just going to call it our demo database maintenance plan. Now I'm going to schedule this one to run every day, Monday through Friday, because we have a regular work week here. And I'm going to do it when things slow down a little bit in the evening at 6 p.m. So there's our schedule. So again, just a daily backup on all of our databases, full daily backup on all of our databases. So when I click next, here's where I can pick our full backup, database backup. But also there are a couple other things that we want to add in here. We want to add a maintenance cleanup task and a cleanup history task. So the maintenance cleanup task will delete old backup files, and we define how long we want to keep those old backup files. But if we don't do some cleanup work here eventually, adding redundant backups will fill up your hard drive. Cleaning up history will delete backup logs, restore logs after a certain period of time, and we'll see how to define that as well. So what I'm going to do in order is run my database backups. We'll do our maintenance cleanup task next, and then cleanup history last. There could be a reason that we want to do these in different order. If hard drive space is low, we might want to delete the old backup files before we create new ones. But regardless, these are generally the three tasks that we want to run. So I'm going to click next on that, and here's where we define each task. So here's our full database backup. Again, I'm just going to pick the one demo company here. And notice the destination. I've got a specific folder that I want to back up these databases to, and that's going to be our demo SQL backup folder. And we'll click next on that. So maintenance cleanup tasks, this is where we delete those redundant backups as they get to be stale. So I'm going to pick that folder that's storing our backups, Our backup extension, we have the default of BAK, and we're going to have these delete automatically after 4 days. So the theory is if we keep 4 days of local backups here and something happens where we have to restore to 2 days ago, we can do all of this locally. We don't have to pull down a backup from our cloud backup solution. And here's where we define how we clean up those maintenance logs. And 4 weeks is probably appropriate here as well. So I'm going to click next on here on this, and we will ultimately create that task. Now, I am going to run this task because this one should run pretty quickly. So, and we're only backing up one database. So I'm going to click execute on that because I do want to talk about eventually how we restore a backup here as well. And while this is running, we can see that our backups are working. Here's the one that we're just creating at 11:16 a.m. Once this is finished, it'll come back showing that the task is complete. Should only take a minute or two here. Anybody ever have those days where your server seems to be running a little slower than normal? Hey, there we go. Okay, here we are. Okay, so there's our backup. Now, like we pointed out earlier, we will likely see redundant copies of these backups. These redundant copies should also be deleted automatically as they get old, based on that backup routine that we just put in place. Now, the last thing I want to do is create another new maintenance plan using the wizard. This time to back up our transaction logs, and we mentioned the point of that. It's to give us the point-in-time restore capability. Now I'll call this our translog maintenance plan. Now, this one we're going to run a little differently. This one we're going to run daily, but we're going to run it every hour during business hours between 8 a.m. and, say, 5 p.m. And these are a little more time sensitive than database backups. The reason I take these hourly is that these logs can grow over time. And if you have a huge log, it's just easier to manage if we take these transaction log backups a little more often. So we have that scheduled, and we click next. This is where I pick what we want to do. We're going to do our transaction log, and we're also going to clean up our maintenance cleanup task here as well. So we will click next here. We'll define our database that we want to run this against. Pick our destination, which will be our demo backup folder. Now, since these are a little more time sensitive, we're only going to keep these around for a couple of days. And honestly, they're only as good as the last SQL Server backup was done. So generally 2 days of transaction log backups are going to be adequate here. And we're going to finish that, let that get created. I'm not going to run this one because I don't want to run short on time here. What I do want to cover real quick, though, is the ability or how we go about restoring one of those databases that we just backed up. So let's jump into that real quick. The way we start that process, and like most things in SQL Server, there are multiple ways we can run this process. But I'm going to do it through the UI. I'm going to right-click on our database. Under Tasks, we're going to restore, and we're going to restore the entire database. So notice it should recognize automatically any backups that were created recently. Here's the one that we just created at 11:16 a.m. So we can restore from that backup. But also too, notice that we can do that point-in-time restore. It knows when previous backups were done. So this is recommended. It is extremely helpful. Now, as we go through the backup process, I'm just going to leave it default to the time of the last database backup. We want to double check a couple of things. We want to make sure that these files that are actually database files that it's going to restore are going to land in the proper place, which they are here. And the last thing we'll have to do is if we're replacing this company database, we have to check this box to overwrite the existing database. Now, in the interest of saving time, I am not going to run this. I'm just going to cancel out of it. But when we click OK, the backup should run, and it should be restored to the point in time that we just created that backup, which is about 10 minutes ago. So I'm going to cancel out of that and try to move on quickly here. So I did want to mention this, SQL Server compatibility, versions of SQL Server related to GP versioning. The one thing to keep in mind here is that GP has safety measures built in. If let's just say hypothetically that we're running GP 2016 currently today on SQL Server 2012. If we attempt to upgrade GP to the most current version, 2018, we'll get a warning that the utilities process will stop us and let us know that, hey, GP 2018 is not compatible in SQL Server 2012. So it'll stop us. However, where a lot of people get in trouble is that when you upgrade SQL Server in place, it does not verify what version of GP you're on. So it will let you update, in this case, SQL Server 2012 to SQL Server 2017, 2018, 2019, regardless of what version of GP you're running, even though that version of GP might not be compatible with that newer version of SQL Server. So critical point to point out, folks run into it periodically. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. So I do have a link here that we can pass around. We'll share this later on those recommended maintenance routines from Microsoft. This link will get a little technical. It tells you how to run it from a transaction SQL statement as opposed to running it from scheduled tasks like we did earlier. But obviously, reach out to your AIM consultant as a resource if you need any guidance on how to get that done. Now, we do have a couple of minutes, and I'm hoping we could leave a few minutes for question and answers as well. So we do want to talk about just quickly accessing GP remotely. There are a lot of different things we can use. Remote desktop services is kind of the gold standard out there. It's what a lot of folks use. It does take licensing and some setups on the server to get it done. There are some easier to use third-party solutions like Citrix is built on top of remote desktop services. LogMeIn and TS Plus are complete third-party applications that don't really leverage RDS licensing. They have their own solutions built in. But at this point, I want to turn it back over to Alice to talk about some of these things and actually some more creative things that we put in place for some existing customers. Alice?
Thanks, Louis. So we had a couple of things come up since this whole lockdown situation has happened, and people looking for quick and easy or quick and dirty ways to do screen sharing. For example, one of our customers has to run payroll today, but the person who normally runs payroll is out sick. So they have someone else training a person, or they're training the person from home to run payroll, and they didn't have any of these solutions, and they weren't sure if they had Microsoft Office with Teams, which it turns out they didn't, but that is another option, the Microsoft Office Teams, Office 365 Teams solution. So what we ended up doing was a Zoom meeting just like this, but it was a one-to-one meeting. And Zoom has a free version, so they were able to do that and run payroll today. So that was pretty exciting.
Good, yeah, obviously a lot more solutions out there than what I even have listed on this slide. Obviously though, if you have a need, reach out. If you have an IT department, they could be a good resource as well. But we can certainly help pull something together for remote access if needed. So I'm showing we have about another minute left. If we want to leave it open for questions, I am available. Can we unmute the crowd?
Yeah, actually, I indicated in chat, if you've got questions, send those to us in chat, and that'll keep it from becoming one person talking over another.
Awesome.
Excuse me, I got a frog. That'll keep us from running over each other, and we'll address the questions there. So just open up your chat panel, send that question, and we'll take care of it.
And we are approaching the time limit here. If anybody has to drop off, I understand.
All right, so we've got a question from Douglas confirming that Louis will send the slideshow with links. Louis, you will be sending that out?
Yes, sir. Yep, Doug, we'll send this around, and I can email these things directly to you as well.
All right, any other questions?
Well, I did have a question rather than type it. Louis, I noticed that you only, scheduled the backup for the TWO company when you were doing the example. Is that the best practice, just the company databases?
No, they're actually, And that's a great question, by the way. I mentioned that you want to back up all of your GP related database, and that's true for database backups and the transaction log backups that we went through. But even deeper than that, if you have, in fact, if everybody still has a minute, I'm going to refer back to my my SQL Server instance here. Keep in mind that even GP and GP related databases might include things like Management Reporter. That Management Reporter database should be backed up. If you're using SQL Server reporting services, then you also want to back up your report server database. Now, there are also recommended maintenance routines that we want to run on system databases, but that's out of scope of what I'd planned on talking about today, but it is a best practice to also back up system databases. System databases is where your user information and some security information and server specific information is stored. And that's important, but the critical thing is really to back up your GP related databases, because even if this whole machine crashed, as long as we have access to our database files for our GP related databases, we could restore those and worst case recreate the user information if we don't have our master databases and system databases backed up. So good question, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Looks like we've covered them all, Alice. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for attending. You know, just reach out again if there's anything that AIM can do to support you during this time, and we wish you all the best.
Stay safe out there.